A small village had a wise and intelligent king who ruled it with sobriety of power and ensured he got the finest of weapons wherever he could find them in order to keep his land and people safe, but kept that piece of information away from his people until they had gotten trained and taught how to use the weapons. One day, he sent his town crier to go around the village and call on the youth to come join his army. And he did. And guess what? The turn-up was quite massive and encouraging. People showed up and the training process began. Meanwhile, they had a rival village just within their neighborhood, ruled by a shrewd tyrant who never bothered to secure good weapons because he was selfish in nature. And of course, he wasn't going to be found anywhere around war if one ever broke out, just because he was a coward. Now, there came a time when the reality of war loomed between the two villages, and the youths of the village, with the shrewd and tyrannical king, stepped up to their king and said to their king, "Fight we shall." But the king answered and said, "With what? Weapons? No, that's antiquated. Weapons are just physical material components for warfare. As a matter of fact, warfare has always been fought with an immaterial weaponry called knowledge." And the shrewd king went on to tell his people that a good and sophisticated weaponry is predicated upon sophisticated minds and knowledge database. The armory of a great regiment is but an appendage. Their strength is inoculated within and not without. So find their tutor, disconnect them from their source, and you're a step closer to conquest. By the time he was done talking, the people were already on their way, trying to formulate strategies on how to implement the plans of their shrewd king, even to the latter. Meanwhile, the youth of the village with the noble and intelligent king, who just started undergoing training, got the news of the threat which ensued from the enemy village from an insider whom they didn't know was an outsider planted in their midst. This chap, who had taken up the same shrewd spirit of his king, sketched the news well enough to arouse their pride and arrogance and make them believe and trust in the weapons which they hadn't been thoroughly trained to use, instead of trusting the initiative and wisdom of their king. And unfortunately, while their anger and pride raged like that of a predator at the sight of a prey, one of them suggested that they rush immediately into battle, and off they went without the courtesy of sending word to their king. But like an ox led to the slaughter, they all ran into battle, and because they didn't know how to use the weapons at their disposal, because they hadn't finished their classes, they all got waylaid and killed, and the expensive and sophisticated weapons with which they went into the battle were taken as spoils and booty by the enemy. Hosea chapter 4 verse 6 says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected me, I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest unto me. Seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God, I will also forget thy children." Now, what's the moral of my parable? We are fundamentally told by scriptures that the art of being inevitably implies warfare with the enemy if you aren't on his side. And don't get confused about it. Satan isn't just a being. He's a carefully conducted system which tries to promulgate and replicate himself in the entire order of being. Beginning from the very attempt to be found in the highest hierarchical system of leadership in the Godhead, as revealed in Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12 to 14, down to the desire to become the determiner and control variable of man's actions and systems. Therefore, the very act of being invariably implies warfare with the enemy if subjugation isn't an idea to be conceptualized. So, the inevitable question from this parable is, have we become nonchalant towards the fact that we've got a wise and noble king who in himself is a man of war, but to whom we no longer turn simply because we think we've now got some skills with the weapons he gave to us? Therefore, have truncated our training process and by the arm of flesh and pride plunged into warfare only to be discomfited and surrender the expensive and sophisticated weapons of our faith and ordinances to charlatans who by every stretch of the imagination have no value for our king nor kingdom. Let's actually get a bit deeper into this. From the parable I just told, we find that information is required for the initiation of any controlled process, and a more sophisticated and intelligent mind has to be the precedent of that information. Again, the most integral component of a regiment is a highly sophisticated control mind, which initiates a controllable war process with a counterintuitive capacity to impede the inflow of information from the enemy's control mind and simultaneously sustains a high rate propensity to procure conquest. That is the most important and integral component of every army or regiment. However, an army or people would be doomed if they are assumed to be too intelligent or equipped enough to go into warfare without their control mind. That's too expensive a risk to attempt. By all means, you need your control mind. See, there's got to be something of the highest order we are willing to give attention to and be humble enough to admit that we constantly need to receive instructions from. Come on, why do we think that an assembly of great and professional footballers, irrespective of their skills and status, still need a coach? It's obvious, there's got to be a control mind. Your skills aren't just good enough. You need a mentor, a tutor, a coach, someone who probably isn't as skillfully endowed as you are, but knows the way around the city. So, it's necessary to give attention to the control mind in your life and be willing and humble enough to judiciously utilize every information that comes from that control mind. And for the purpose of our context right now, God is the ultimate control mind to whom our allegiance should be given. The second lesson we can derive from this parable is the fact that it's also cardinal and necessary to set up a competent knowledge guard which ensures the system is inoculated against infiltrations. The youths of the village with the noble king got quite overly excited about the fact that they were being trained with sophisticated weapons such as were new to the entire community, and in the process lost guard and didn't know when a traitor was planted in their midst. So watch it. Be circumspect. Don't be carried away by exciting news or results to the point where you become inconsiderate of all that is pertinent around you. You know, in Matthew chapter 16, verse 13 to 23, Jesus asked his disciples who they thought he was, and Peter was the only one who found his way to the Father's mind and was able to decode and told Jesus who he actually was. And guess what? When Jesus heard this from Peter, he commended and conferred the mantle of the leadership of the church on him. But just a few verses later, Jesus began to talk about the fact that he was going to Jerusalem to suffer and be crucified by the scribes, elders, and chief priests, and was going to be resurrected on the third day. But when Peter heard this, he took Jesus aside and began to rebuke Jesus from saying such things, and Jesus knew that this wasn't the same Peter who just revealed his identity. A different spirit had obviously taken over his being, but Jesus quickly rebuked that devil from him. Now, the inevitable question is, what's the correlation between being used by God and being vulnerable to the enemy almost immediately after? He was simply uncircumspect. Beloved, watch it when the praises come rolling in. Watch it when you reach a milestone. The enemy is busy and about like a roaring lion looking for whom to devour. And today I pray for you that God will help you judiciously utilize his wisdom at your disposal, even in these days, in Jesus' name.